Hello, and welcome to the Walrus Leadership Forum presented by Brain Canada. I'm Jennifer Hollett. I'm the Executive Director of the Walrus, and we're thrilled to be joining you live in conversation across the country. I'd like to start by acknowledging the land that I'm on in Toronto, Ontario, Toronto. A land acknowledgement helps us recognize history, thinking about how it informs where we are now and what changes can be made going forward in a commitment to reconciliation. The offices of the Walrus and where I am right now are located within the bounds of Treaty 13, signed with Mississaugas of the Credit. This land is also the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. Today, Toronto is home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We're honored to carry on and contribute to a tradition of storytelling, and we encourage you to take a moment to reflect on the land that you're on, wherever you're joining us from today. As part of the ongoing work of reconciliation, we encourage you to read the 94 calls to action recommended by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and we'll share that link with you now. A bit about the Walrus. The Walrus is committed to being a platform for Canada's conversation, challenging, urgent, complex, and thoughtful conversations. And we do this in a number of different ways through our fact-based journalism, which is available in print, but also online at thewalrus.ca, through our podcasts, including our latest podcast, The Deep Dive, as well in our event series like this one. And this work is powered by our donors, our supporters, and our partners. So thank you all for being a part of it, and to Brain Canada for making this event possible. To start today's conversation, we'll hear from one of Brain Canada's major partners in the area of mental health research. Please join me in welcoming the chair of Bell Let's Talk Mental Health Initiative, Mary Deacon. Hi, Mary.
Hi, thank you, Jennifer. Bell Let's Talk has a long-standing partnership with Brain Canada going back about a decade. When we created the Bell Brain Canada Mental Health Research Training Awards with the goal of nurturing and supporting a new generation of neuroscientists. We chose to partner with Brain Canada both then and now because they are best in class at what they do. And the matching funding arrangements they secured from the federal government several times over in the last number of years has meant that we have been able to support even more of Canada's outstanding researchers. And in 2021, we established the Bell Let's Talk Brain Canada Mental Health Research Program to support novel and transformative research that is accelerating the development of innovative solutions to ensure effective, sustainable, and accessible mental health care for all Canadians. This is very much aligned with Bell Let's Talk's vision of a Canada where everyone can get the mental health support they need in order to flourish. It is a lofty vision, but I'm sure you will all agree it is a worthy one. I believe everyone can play a role in moving mental health forward. And for our part at Bell Let's Talk, we do this in several ways. We fund efforts to raise awareness and reduce stigma. We invest in mental health organizations, large and small, coast to coast to coast. And we fund research to support and drive discovery and innovation. And each year on Bell Let's Talk Day, we mobilize behind Canadians and people around the world who are taking action to create positive change in mental health in our communities, our schools, and our workplaces. January 26th marked the 12th annual Bell Let's Talk Day. And as a result of unprecedented levels of engagement, Bell's commitment to Canadian mental health grew from 121 million to almost $130 million and counting. Our investment in Brain Canada is an outstanding example of putting that money to use to advance the mental health agenda. And now more than ever, mental health matters. We all need to ensure that mental health remains a priority issue and a priority for investment as we work through the pandemic and the lasting impact experts say it will have on our mental health. Today, I look forward to hearing about just some of the projects being funded by the Bell Brain Canada partnership, including the role they play in helping ensure access to mental health supports and services for all. Thank you, and back to you, Jennifer.
Thank you so much, Mary. We are talking here, and it was great to learn about all that work. All right, excited to continue our conversation today. And what I'd like to do right now is invite another one of Brain Canada's valued partners in this space, the Erika Legacy Foundation's Executive Director, Chris Maksylewicz. Hi, Chris. Nice to see you and looking forward to hearing from you.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. It is a real honor to actually be a part of this. You know, the Erika Legacy Foundation is focused on suicide prevention and mental health. And we started in 2016 after Erika, who is Erika Elkington, a young woman who at the age of 29 passed by suicide. And we are so happy to be here. And we have partnered with Brain Canada because we truly believe in the power of technology and the power of science. And it's one of the things that is a staple of our foundation. It's what makes us different. So to come today and talk to everybody out in the world about technology and neuroscience is really, really something special to us. And it's one of the reasons that we originally said yes to partnering with Brain Canada, because they are truly the best in class when it comes to such things. So with that, I am deeply honored. My foundation is deeply honored. Thank you for having us.
Thanks, Chris. The mental health conversation, as we just heard, is such an important one, but especially right now with the pandemic, with the war, it's something many of us are navigating firsthand, wherever we are, be it at work, at home, whether with other people or alone. Today, we'll hear from 3 scientists on how they're working to address gaps in Canadian mental health care through innovative technology in order to ultimately improve the systems available to everyone. Now, to our audience at home, we want to know where you're joining us from today. I want to hear from you. Type it in. Where are you right now? We're in Canada, we're in the world. All right. Hello to Edmonton. I see Ottawa, Fredericton, St. John, many cities in town. Thank you so much for being a part of this. We also encourage you to share this conversation, and you can do so on social media. So if there's something that you hear, quote tweet it. If you're watching us, take a picture of your setup or a screen grab, post it on Facebook or Instagram, and you can tag us at the Walrus. It's really great to be able to see how you're joining us and hear what's on your mind. Now, to introduce the speakers and facilitate our conversation, we have an incredible moderator, former broadcast journalist and suicide prevention advocate, Lynn Keane. Lynn, welcome to the Zoom stage. Hope you're doing well.
Good morning. Good afternoon, Jennifer. Thanks so much.
Oh, but both depending on the time zone, right?
That's true. As Chris said, this is just an incredible conversation, and I'm honored to be part of it today. I want to thank the Walrus for the opportunity to moderate today's event on such an important topic or group of topics, and one that is especially close to me. In 2009, our 23-year-old son, Daniel, died by suicide. In the aftermath, our family was completely devastated. We simply had no understanding around diseases of the brain and the potential for a catastrophic outcome when left untreated. As the shock lifted, I went in search of answers. I knew that I would have to try to understand Daniel's experience if I was ever going to begin to heal and start that long journey towards acceptance. That journey led me to mental health professionals who gave of their time and supported my mission. I combed through research on youth mental illness, suicide, and prevention. Chronic health conditions, early life stress, possible head injury, self-medicating behavior, and a sense of worthlessness were all part of the litany of factors that were involved in Daniel's depression. The interior shame that he experienced destroyed his instinct for self-preservation. When I began writing my book, Give Sorrow Words, I went back in time to fit the pieces of Daniel's life together. And it was there that I first encountered the stigma associated with mental illness. And I also began to acknowledge that our lack of understanding with regards to mental illness, mental health issues had contributed to Daniel's growing malaise. We told him he could do anything if he simply applied himself. But when you no longer understand what's going on with you, and that you've become a burden, you no longer have the capacity to understand what's happening to your mind. Since his passing, I made a promise to myself that I would share Daniel's story to educate and bring awareness about youth mood disorders in an effort to prevent suicide. I want young people to potentially see themselves and reach out for the care and support they so desperately need. Suicide never leaves behind a simple narrative. Depression and diseases of the brain arise from a variety of factors that are often misunderstood. Today, we'll be hearing from 3 scientists in a row about their research. University of Toronto Professor of Psychiatry, Dr. Tarek Rajji, Associate Professor of Radiology at the University of Calgary, Dr. Catherine Lebel, and Assistant Professor of Psychiatry at the University of British Columbia, Dr. Fidel Vila-Rodriguez. First, I want to welcome to the Tarek to the Walrus stage.
Thank you, Lynn, and thank you for sharing your personal story. And it's a wonderful, it's very pleasure to be part of this event and to be among colleagues who are doing really terrific work. I'm here also representing a collaboration that we have in Toronto that brought together basic scientists, clinical researchers, knowledge translation experts, people with lived experience, and learners to implement this project that will, thanks to Brain Canada and Bell Let's Talk, is funded. What are we going to do in this project is try to optimize an exciting new treatment for depression called theta burst stimulation, or TBS. The reason why it's exciting, it's a form of magnetic stimulation that is very brief to deliver. It takes about 3 to 4 minutes, and I think we'll be hearing more about it also by Dr. Fidel Vila-Rodriguez. And it can be delivered to people who don't respond to medications or cannot tolerate medications. But even among those people, when TBS is delivered, it's still about only 30% of people are free from depression symptoms after they receive TBS. So how are we going to improve it? How do we plan to optimize it? Well, TBS, the way it's delivered now to people with depression, is based on a discovery made in the 80s in an healthy animal model, where the discovery was that TBS, when it was discovered then, can promote brain plasticity in a region called the hippocampus. It's a deep structure in the brain that is involved in learning and memory. However, when we deliver it now in the same protocol to humans, we deliver it first to people with depression. So we don't know if the parameters that were discovered back in the 80s work as well in an animal model of depression. We also deliver it to the frontal region of the brain, not the hippocampus, because the frontal region of the brain is the target region for treating depression. What's also exciting and opportunity is that since the 80s, there has been quite a bit of advancement in TBS on the animal side to optimize further its ability to promote and cause brain plasticity. So in this project, we'll start first by doing a series of experiments to optimize and discover what are the best parameters in an animal model of depression to cause brain plasticity in the frontal region of the animal model of depression, and take these learnings and modify the human protocol, and then compare it to the currently existing protocol to see, can this modified protocol result in better plasticity in the frontal region of people with depression? And why is this important? Why do we care about this? Is, as I mentioned, a lot of people with depression still do not respond to treatment, to existing treatment. But also, even those who do respond to treatment, the current treatment, whether it's medication or brain stimulation, don't have a major impact on what we call the cognitive symptoms of depression. So these are problems with memory and thinking that come with depression. Why is this important? Because now we know that having history of depression, especially if we have memory problems and thinking problems that come with depression, almost doubles the risk for us developing dementia later on. So what we're hoping is that by optimizing TBS, maybe it's not only becomes a better treatment for the depressive symptoms, but also maybe an intervention that may prevent dementia in people who have a history of depression. I will stop here and thank you.
Thanks, Tarek. So I'm Catherine Lebel, and my research is really focused around children's brain development and how that brain development is related to children's behavior, learning, and their environment. And so specifically relevant to this project, I'm focused on how parent mental health is related to children's brains. Perinatal mental health problems are very common, and they've been made even worse by the COVID-19 pandemic. Rates of anxiety and depression have doubled or even tripled during the pandemic. And these perinatal mental health problems have very long-term implications for both parents and children. For example, perinatal mental health disorders like anxiety and depression are associated with preterm birth, with different parenting styles, and with behavior and mental health problems in the children. Perinatal mental health disorders are also associated with changes in children's brains, particularly in areas related to emotion regulation. These brain changes are probably one of the mechanisms via which parent mental health impacts children's behavior and children's mental health later on. So interventions and treatments for perinatal mental health are available, but they can be very difficult to access for many reasons, including cost, location, timing, and other challenges. Access has been even more complicated during the pandemic. Furthermore, a lot of existing treatments often ignore parenting challenges that come with mental health and don't meet the specific needs of the users. So a team led by Leslie Roos at the University of Manitoba and Leanne Tomfor-Madsen at the University of British Columbia developed an app-based and peer-supported treatment to address postpartum mental health and parenting skills called Building Emotional Awareness and Mental Health, or BEAM. It's a 10-week program that includes clinical coaching and peer support, and it can be completed on a phone or a tablet. And really importantly, I think, to know is that this app was co-designed with women with lived experience of postpartum mental health challenges. So our research project in this space will test the efficacy of this app-based treatment for improving parent mental health, for improving parenting strategies, and do this in a randomized controlled trial design. And we're also testing how this program impacts children. So how it impacts kids' behavior and their brain development, using advanced magnetic resonance imaging to measure brain connectivity, particularly in areas related to emotion and later mental health. So this research project will help us understand first whether this is an effective program for parents, but also whether it induces changes in the children's behavior and brains as well. Evidence-based interventions like this to improve parent and child health together can make a huge difference long-term for families here in Canada and potentially around the world. Ultimately, we hope that this will help provide evidence for the effectiveness of this intervention for both parents and children, and then help us scale it up to deliver it more widely and support more people. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I want to start by thanking the Walrus for continuing this very important conversation. And of course, Bell Let's Talk and Brain Canada for very much needed support for mental health. We've heard already that depression afflicts 4% of Canadians on any given year. That means 1.5 million people. Depression is the leading cause of disability in the world. And we've heard today as well that is associated with mortality due to death by suicide. Even though talk therapy and medications do help a significant proportion of people with depression, an estimated 40% of people do not get better with these treatments, or they suffer side effects like sexual dysfunction or increased weight that make this treatment not work, these treatments work for them. Transcranial magnetic stimulation, or TMS, is a non-invasive neuromodulation treatment that works by stimulating a small spot on the outer part of the brain that we call cerebral cortex, and modulates brain circuits that are involved in the regulation of mood, sleep, energy, or appetite, all part of symptoms of depression. The treatment is delivered in a clinic Monday to Friday for 30 consecutive days. A collaboration of Canadian research sites in 2018 led to the description of a very brief 3-minute TMS protocol called theta burst stimulation. And that is also the foundation of the project by Tarek that he just talked about. That was a major gain in terms of the availability of this treatment, because we went from the standard treatment that took 40 minutes to deliver to just 3 minutes. That study led to the approval by the FDA of theta burst stimulation, and it has played a major role in several provinces in Canada for theta burst to be considered to be provided in the public health system. Now, the study supported by Bell Let's Talk and Brain Canada wants to further more the convenience and the speed of response to theta burst stimulation in depression. The goal of this project is to test whether delivering and packing up treatments and delivering several treatments per day for just 5 days can treat a depressive episode fast. Such a speed of response to treat depression would position theta burst stimulation as a rapid acting treatment and would decrease the burden of time required to come to clinic and certainly get people better faster. Thank you so much.
Thank you again, Tarek, Catherine, and Fidel. I know I have many questions for you, and I'm just filled with hope, actually, with listening to these novel therapies and interventions. And I know many of the audience has questions as well. So we're going to start the question and answer session right now. So please join me back on the Walrus stage. For the audience members, to submit a question, you can ask it in the Zoom chat box. Great, we're all here. My first question is to Tarek. Your research focuses on enhancing cognition in patients with dementia that is linked to depression. Can you bring us up to speed on the state of this research and what kind of improvements and or outcomes are you seeing currently?
Thank you, and yeah, that's a great question. That's the links between depression and dementia has become clearer and clearer over the last few decades, and now it is depression, especially in late life in older individuals, is considered one of the 12 potentially modifiable risk factors for dementia. And putting these 12 conditions together, it's estimated that we could prevent maybe 40% cases of dementia. What we know, the links are from epidemiological studies, so from population studies, making the links between people who have history of depression, how they have higher rates of dementia. We're also better understanding the mechanisms, so the brain abnormalities that potentially link this condition to the neurodegenerative disease that could cause the dementia. And we are now actually in another study that is funded by Brain Canada. It's a 7-year study. In its last year, we're trying to we're evaluating the combination of another form of brain stimulation called direct current stimulation. So that's electrical stimulation versus the magnetic stimulation that we talked about today, and combining it with with cognitive training, memory training, to see can we prevent cognitive decline? Can we prevent progression towards dementia in older individuals with history of depression, with or without cognitive problems? Because also that changes the risk in an extent, as well as with individuals with cognitive problem but without depression. So it's the results. Hopefully, we'll have them by the end of this year about this trial. But it's a very intensive area of research, and the projects we talked about today could also lead to another form of interventions that could lead to these interventions. So the work is happening now. I think for the first trial I mentioned, the study, hopefully we'll have the results by the end of this year, 2022.
Thank you, Tarek. Catherine, I'd like to bring you in here now. I'm sure many parents that are watching right now are fascinated by your research about brain development in children. To start, could you tell us how you've been able to find a healthy brain in kids?
sorry, to define a healthy
Sorry.
brain. Oh, that is a good question. And I think we talk about that a lot actually in the lab and with my colleagues, because we often take kids with some particular exposure or disorder and we compare them to what we might call super normals. But there's a real range of healthy brains. There's a real range of healthy behaviors. It varies a lot individually. So I think the field is moving a lot towards understanding individual differences, really with a lens toward understanding what works for different kids. But yeah, it's a tough question. Actually, it's a much harder question to answer than I think we all would like. But we do spend a lot of time trying to define what a typical trajectory of development is, and one that would lead to healthy outcomes ultimately.
So for a parent watching right now, and they've got young children, and they're very concerned about their mental health, especially during this period of time, are there things that they can look to say, you know, my child is functioning well, or they're seeing a difference, they're seeing a change in their behavior or their actions? And I'm just wondering if you can shed some light on that.
Yeah. So again, there's a range of behaviors that are normal, and parents often know best whether their kids are struggling or not. But certainly there are screening tools out there that physicians or psychologists can use. Some of them you can even get at yourself to sort of figure out if your child is meeting milestones that would be expected for an age, or if their behavior is typical or not. But, you know, it's important to keep in mind, of course, the range, and there are some reactions that are totally normal during a stressful time like a pandemic, right? Kids change all the time. So there's a lot of room for kids to improve and change. And we just hope we can recognize those behavioral difficulties and support families and kids appropriately. But, you know, the things that people can do to support appropriate development in children remain the same as they did before the pandemic. Building healthy relationships, you know, stable home environment, those kinds of things have been important for a long time, and they remain important during the pandemic.
Great, thank you. Fidel, your research focuses on bridging the gap between neurobiology research and the clinical setting where patients receive care. Could you describe the gap for us as you see it, and what's missing in typical clinical settings?
That's an excellent question, Lynn. And it's a question that relates to a topic that we call translational medicine, and which is, how do we make the technologies, the treatments, the programs like Catherine's is describing, how we translate the research to have an impact every day in clinics? How do we do that translation? I think there needs to be, in addition to continuing this conversation with events like this, with concrete support from funding agencies, there needs to be a shift in how we think about care and how we transform current healthcare systems into what we call learning healthcare systems, where that translation from research to clinical practice, it's already thought and kind of facilitated in the context of care. So to me, that aspect of translating and thinking of translation as from day one when we do the research, and for health authorities, for the healthcare system to start to think of research all the time as, how are we going to implement this? What are the things that we need to put in place? That to me is the critical aspect, so that we don't have delays for such amazing research like Catherine or Tarek are describing, and then they get amazing findings, but then people don't benefit. We need to work on that aspect.
Absolutely. I think this is what this Walrus conversation today is doing for everybody that's watching. They're just having that, the connection is much greater through these kinds of events. So we have an audience member, Kendra, is asking, and this, I would put this out to anybody, any of the scientists on the panel. Kendra is asking, for the average person, how is TBS different from electroconvulsive therapy?
Tarek, do you want to go? It's a question that we get, I think, all the time, because both treatments, on the one hand, stimulate the brain. But that's about it in terms of similarities, because with transcranial magnetic stimulation, what we want to do is stimulate the brain, but we do not want to trigger a seizure. With electroconvulsive therapy, what we want to do is to trigger a seizure with current. And I know that ECT is a treatment that is associated with a lot of stigma, unfortunately. It's a life-saving treatment. It's the most effective treatment for very severe depression. And it's important to understand that triggering seizures in a controlled environment is associated with a lot of physiological changes that help treating depression, schizophrenia, even Parkinson's. So it's a question that I think, Tarek, probably you get all the time as well. They are very different in how they work. They are both very effective.
Thank you. I have another
Maybe
audience.
I'll add to
Sorry, go ahead.
Fidel's point, just one also differentiation from the clinical perspective is that ECT has been known to be linked to some memory problems after people receive ECT, especially what we call the autobiographical memories, our personal memories. That's not the case usually with the TMS protocols, including TBS, where actually the opposite, that we have some signal to suggest that maybe they would promote and improve cognitive function, as I mentioned, the memory and thinking in people with depression. And that's why we're trying to pursue it as potential interventions to try to reduce the risk of developing cognitive events. So that's also a distinction. Also agreeing with everything that Fidel mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you, Tarek. Another audience member, Shelley, is asking, is there a way to identify what subpopulations may be more likely to see improvement, both short and long term, with treatments that both Tarek and Fidel are researching? So I'm wondering if this is basically
it's a great question. If I'm understanding the question correctly, is that can we identify who are the people who would benefit most from a certain type of intervention? And that's an exciting area of research, and all mental health in general and all medicines, that the concept of personalization, and then to try to discover what we call biomarkers, or try to discover certain characteristics of the individual who is seeking treatment, to try to match them to the right treatment. Because as we heard about depression today, there are many forms of treatment. We have different medications, we have different forms of psychotherapy, different forms of brain stimulation, and there is ongoing work, and that some of the work is happening in Canada and with colleagues, and Fidel is leading some of this work in terms of and then doing some of the imaging, for example, characteristics. Some of the we collect also measures of capturing the neurophysiology of the brain, so the electrical output of the brain, try to understand those signals to try to match the right treatment. So there's a lot of exciting in the genetic component. Also, we can look at those and try to determine what medication is better, would be better tolerated, for example. So there's a lot of exciting work. We're not there yet in terms of implementing it right away in practice, but we're getting closer. And I think moving us to a learning healthcare system, as Fidel was mentioning, where the research and the new data is generated not only from research studies, but also from the routine care, would help us accelerate the discoveries and accelerate the movement of new discoveries to the care. So it becomes kind of a virtuous circle of learning from care, informing the research, and then moving back to the actual care of people.
Thank you. Catherine, I wanted to go back to this question about the child brain. It might be too soon, that you may not have the data available, but can you tell us anything about how pandemic conditions and related stress might be affecting brain development in children?
Yeah, so we have some early data that we've collected at 3 months of age in children, looking at their brains, specifically at their brain connectivity. And we do see that children's brain connectivity is associated with prenatal measures of depression and anxiety. So we have early indicators. We actually knew that pre-pandemic, but because we're seeing higher rates of depression and anxiety during the pandemic in pregnancy, we are seeing higher rates of this altered brain connectivity in children at 3 months. So we definitely are seeing that already. We don't know yet how that relates to the child's behavior, but we are definitely seeing early signals in the brain that might potentially predispose kids to some challenges later on.
Just, I'm fascinated by your research in terms of education for parents. The more that we, as you know, before we even become pregnant or carrying our children, the more we understand about that sort of prenatal health is so important. It's really something that when I was having our children, you know, going through that, there was no knowledge around that. I mean, you knew the basics, but do you think that is something that's going to play a big role in terms of education?
Yeah, so I hope so, for sure. But what I really hope is that it's not just targeted at pregnant women,
For sure.
because a lot of this is broader. You know, one of the protective factors we see is social support. And we see that both in pregnancy, social support is protective against higher symptoms of depression and anxiety.
Right.
And now we see it in the kids.
Right.
People who reported higher social support in pregnancy, their kids' brains are not as altered. And so to me, this just highlights how much of a community thing this is, right? Like, as a community, we need to be providing support to pregnant individuals. It's not just about telling them what to do or not do, right?
Right. No, great information. Tarek, I wanted to come back to you. You talked about theta burst stimulation previously, but I wanted to maybe unpack this a bit more. What questions are you personally hoping to able to research or understand through the novel therapies that you're working on right now?
Yeah, so I think the project that we're focusing on is focusing on what we call the translational neuroscience, which is the other side of the spectrum of translation medicine. So and specifically, what we're trying to do is do what we call bench to bedside research. So in the same project, because as I mentioned, the current TBS protocol, so theta burst stimulation, that is being used, has been shown to be effective, to a certain extent, and we need to promote it. It's been approved by the FDA, and in Canada, being delivered in different provinces, has been based on discoveries on the bench side, so on the basic science world and the animal studies back in the 80s. And so there is a, and that's a common gap in medicine in general. The advancement that happened in the basic science takes several decades to transform, to move into clinical research, let alone clinical care. So what we're trying to do is accelerate that cycle. So what we want to do is discover how should theta burst stimulation be delivered? What are the parameters of stimulation? For example, what is the spacing between the different episodes of the theta burst stimulation that is optimal for an individual with depression? Because that spacing may not be the same in terms of its effect to cause brain plasticity as the one that was discovered in the 80s, because the one that was discovered in the 80s was not in an animal model of depression. Also, it was not discovered in the region that we use to treat depression, that we target to treat depression. So we want to go back to the bench side, and this is, work will be led by Graham Collingridge and Evelyn Lamb, two world leaders in basic science and plasticity, and then discover what should TBS look like in an animal model of depression, then bridge that. So that's the connection, the translation, modify the human protocol that now we've been using in many studies to mimic the new protocol that is discovered in the animal model of depression, and see, is it going to lead to better treatment, better response, better remission from depression and free of depression compared to the existing protocol, by promoting better brain plasticity in humans. So that cycle of bridging the bench to the bedside, what we see it. I'm very excited about this project because it's one of the few projects I've been involved in where we do in the same time span, same 3-year project, animal work, take the animal work, apply it to humans, and look what we find in humans. So that's a unique opportunity, I find.
Thank you, Tarek. Fidel, I wanted to ask you to share again a little bit more about what you spoke a bit about TMS off the top. And yesterday in our rehearsal, you described it as shedding light in the dark places of the brain, which I found fascinating. Can you explain how it works again for the audience?
Yeah, thanks so much, Lynn. And for those in the audience who share my lack of formal training or knowledge in physics, I found that a student that was in the lab named Tyler did a fantastic prototype of a small kind of TMS device. So I'm just going to do a little bit show and tell for people to understand how TMS works. And I'm going to walk everyone through what we are seeing here. We've got what it's a mini model of TMS. Basically, we've got a source of energy here, these 3 AA batteries, a circuit, and a loop of wires round that is connected. We conveniently have a switch that when I turn it on, we see an LED light going on that tells us that current is flowing. The current is also flowing through the loop of wires, but we can't see anything here, right? There's nothing in here. But what the audience needs to picture is literally a donut, a 3-dimensional donut here. Because if we align a conductor, something that can conduct current, it can induce current without wires. So the other part of this model is this needs to be imagined as a brain. Is another loop of wires, the same diameter, and it has an LED there. If current is induced here, we should see a light here. So we have our little TMS model here going on, and it's on. Let's see what happens. Look at that. The light goes on, and it's the dimensions of a donut. If I go further up, it stops, and it's 3-dimensional. It's at the bottom. So that's exactly what TMS does. It sheds light in dark places in the brain.
That's great. Thank you so much. I have a couple questions on the app, but first I wanted to get Catherine an opportunity to share more about the app-based peer-supported intervention to improve postpartum mental health. Can you share any insights or any of the research data that you've gleaned so far?
So the app is still, it's nearing the end of the testing phase, but it's gone through multiple iterations with people who are experiencing postpartum mental health challenges, people with lived experience of this. And there's sort of this rapid feedback process where people provide feedback and then the app is updated. So I'm not actually doing the updating, but it's been great actually. And it's, like I said, it's been co-designed with people with experience of postpartum mental health, which I think is so critical here, because for these sorts of things to work, they can't be designed in isolation. They have to be designed with the people who are going to be using them so that they are effective for the people using them. So that's been a really important part of this process from the beginning. And Leslie Roos, Leanne Tom-Madsen have been really fantastic about engaging the target population along the way.
And I think, I know, staying with you, Catherine, I know Tina had asked a question from the audience about, she's saying, since an app has environmental limitations, how can we work to provide additional real life supports? And I think maybe you spoke to that earlier, just in terms of children's mental health. I think it's the same thing for prenatal and postpartum women as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's only part of it, right? Yeah. People need mental health support. One of the key features of the app is the peer support, which people have really highlighted as important to them and valuable to them in their journey. And, connecting with other people going through the same thing, we all know that's so important when we go through difficulties. So that's part of it, but you're right. It's not going to address systemic barriers that people might have experienced. There's a whole other side of this, right, to addressing other things, but this is an important part of it.
Exactly. Anna is asking, with a lens to culture and socioeconomic considerations, are these interventions available to end effective for First Nations people and others? And I think that's actually a really good question.
I think it's such a good question, and it's so important. And that was definitely part of the design. So there were a lot of Indigenous folks incorporated in the beginning, engaged with lived experience, and to make sure that this was appropriate and desired and valuable to those folks, a lot of low-income families were engaged as well. So really, accessibility is such an issue with a lot of mental health treatments. And particularly if we're talking about going to see a psychologist, you have to be able to physically get there. You have to have babysitting to get there. You probably, you have to have either insurance or a lot of cash on hand to be able to afford it. So that was part of the idea here, is that it's more widely accessible to people in rural areas, or who can't get childcare or who can't afford, formal counseling. So definitely it was designed with accessibility in mind, and accessibility to broad groups, including Indigenous populations and low-income families.
Great, thank you. I guess this is sort of a broader question for all the researchers on the panel today. Is all of these novel interventions and treatments and therapies are incredible, and they, as I said earlier, provide hope. Can they address the gaps in the mental health system and the access just generally to underserved and unhoused communities? This is for anybody.
I mean,
maybe I can.
Go ahead,
sorry,
Tarek.
Catherine, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to repeat kind of what I said before, that I think these are really important pieces of it, but this is absolutely not a complete solution. And, we have to work in multiple different areas to properly address the full scope of mental health challenges currently facing people.
This is for Tarek. I wanted to kind of go back to what we talked about in the beginning about depression, dementia, and the layperson's understanding of dementia continues to evolve. And some folks that are watching and tuning in right now might be starting to learn about the signs as they care for their aging parents. Are there early interventions that can improve outcomes? And if so, what symptoms should we look for in our loved ones, just generally in terms of watching them sort of through that aging process?
Yeah, it's a great question, and we're learning more and more the links between mental health and dementia, not just depression, but also in general about different mental health conditions, which is as potentially increasing the risk of developing cognitive decline, dementia later on. So I think, and as we're all getting older as a population, in Canada, as we know now, there are more people who are 65 and above than younger individuals. We are going to face this cognitive decline more and more as we all get older. There are many. So in terms of the first part of the question, what can we do about it? Is there anything we can do to prevent? There are some promising avenues that we can pursue, because also what we're a hopeful message, as I mentioned earlier, is that the population studies suggest that 40% of cases of dementia could be prevented if we modify some of the risk factors that we have, and if not more. So here we're talking about smoking, we're talking about depression, we're talking about diabetes and physical inactivity, cognitive inactivity, lack of socialization. So these are all risk factors that increase the risk of developing dementia. And so the consequence of that, even though we still need to prove it and doing more studies, but I think if we address that, so if we engage in cognitive stimulating activities, if we engage in social activities, that not just in engaging our mental abilities, but also us as a social human beings, engaging our social parts of the brain and physical activity, treating our depression, managing our metabolic, physical health, there is a good chance that we could reduce the risk of dementia. So at this point, it's almost like a roadmap to try to live a healthy lifestyle that could lead to lower risk of dementia. In terms of the second part of your question, what are some of those early signs that we could look for as we care for our older family members, for example? Are we seeing people starting to miss conversations or asking to repeat things that we've talked about them before, and then it doesn't seem that the person is forgetting about these conversations? Is the person starting to make mistakes and let's say in their independent living activities, mistakes in managing their finances, mistakes in managing their day-to-day cooking, or are we seeing sometimes what we look for is not necessarily mistakes, but that maybe the person stops doing things that used to be complex before, and well, they are complex, but they used to be simple for them, and now they seem to be more complex. So hobbies, I can think of someone who does woodwork, and then you can see the quality of the woodwork and the complexity of the woodwork becomes simpler and simpler. Or preparing meals, the person avoids preparing complex meals and go to simpler recipes. So all of that suggests there is some change, and it's the earlier we try to get this person, talking about access again, get this person to get their cognitive, their memory assessed, there is a higher chance of intervening and addressing what are those modifiable risk factors for that unique person, try to address them so that we can, as much as possible, slow down the cognitive decline and deterioration.
And thank you for that. I think as family members, we end up feeling frustrated because we don't know what we're seeing. And so I think as support and family members, we need to have tools that we can, as you're speaking to, just to try to understand what they're going through and support them. So I think I have time. I don't know if there's any more questions from the audience. I've got another question here for Fidel. And this is in terms of, we're looking at the broad range of mental health conditions, mental illness. Are there certain conditions that are more receptive to these types of treatments than others? And I guess we could specifically talk about the TMS.
Yeah, it's an excellent question. And this is a very active area of research. And the indications, the mental illnesses that are amenable to be treated with TMS are constantly expanding. Just to mention two concrete ones that are already approved. One is obsessive compulsive disorder, and another one is smoking cessation. So those are formal indications that we call. So we know that TMS works for them, but other areas that are showing already significant benefit and clinical trials are happening include post-traumatic stress disorder, substance use disorders in general, and even schizophrenia. So it's a very, very active and expanding area of research. And the fact that we can treat and we can target different parts of the cerebral cortex and target different brain circuits makes it amenable to be able to use for different neuropsychiatric conditions. And I just, of course, dementia and other neurological conditions. It's a very, very active area of research. We're going to see more and more.
Well, wow, so much information. Thank you so much to all of our guests, our panelists today. It was just, I found it just a robust, very stimulating conversation. There's so much more that we could say, but time is our enemy, so it's time to wrap up. Thank you again, and thanks to the Walrus for organizing this important conversation today.
Always a sign of a good conversation when we wish we had more time. Thank you again to Dr. Tarek, Rajji, Dr. Catherine Lebel, Dr. Fidel, Vila-Rodriguez, and of course to our wonderful moderator, suicide prevention advocate, Lynn, Keane. I have to say, so often when we're staring down mental health issues, we say, what can we do, right? And we know that there is power in talking about it like we did today, in community support, as well as seeking a doctor, a therapist, expert support. But to learn about this research and to hear about what's in the works and coming our way is very encouraging. Thanks again for joining us. Please keep an eye on your inbox. You will receive a follow-up email. And if you'd like to attend future events like this one and stay in touch with us at the Walrus, please sign up for our newsletter. You just have to opt in. There'll be a link in that email. At the Walrus, we really believe that trustworthy journalism is essential. And in uncertain times, and that's what we're living in, it should never be taken for granted. With your support, we'll continue to provide fact-checked, long-form journalism that Canadians can rely on. So if you enjoyed this event, this free event, consider making a donation to the Walrus. You can visit us online at thewalrus.ca. Just click on donate. Thank you to Vivian Poupon and Kate Singler, and to everyone at Break Canada for making this conversation possible. Thanks as well to our annual sponsors, Air Canada, Inspire, Labatt Breweries of Canada, Meta, and Shaw. Community is so important in these COVID times, and each one of you is a part of the Walrus. Thanks again for tuning in, and have a great day.